in fertilizer. So the question is essentially that if there is a last mile connectivity problem, how will BAPU solve it? Now here we have to distinguish the fact that last mile connectivity problem is not for fertilizer. We have ways to get fertilizer very close to the consumers. We have consumer centers for that. That is there in all districts and very close to farmers. So farmers are able to access there. There might be small issues there, but that is not a big enough issue for us to be concerned about. The last mile connectivity problem is about banks. The banks are not available at the village level. The banks are not available close enough. So cash, we are not able to bring it to the farmers. Fertilizer, we can easily bring it to the farmers. We have systems in place for that. But cash, we're not able to bring. Now in DBT, under normal DBT, which is cash transfer, this is required. Bank connectivity is required. So there, last mile connectivity is not there. Whereas under BAPU, no bank intermediary is required. Direct interaction between farmer and the fertilizer consumer center. However, money will be, the subsidy is given based on authentication. So only if it's authenticated, you will get the subsidy. The subsidy will still go to the producer only, not to the farmer directly. So it is not actually DBT. It's a step towards DBT. So that's the difference between BAPU and DBT. And both involve different last mile connectivity challenges. As far as fertilizer is concerned, we already have the capacity to deliver. But as far as banking service is concerned, right now we don't have a capacity. Jan Dhan Yojana is trying. Okay. So now let's get into the next chapter, which is about India's labor market. So here we have to discuss the concept of demographic dividend, which we already covered earlier. However, in this chapter, the formal sector versus informal sector is given the largest amount of importance. And India's labor market in general is looked at. So overview is like this. We have a demographic dividend to exploit. What is the meaning of demographic dividend? We already covered. It's a time in which the working population is the biggest chunk of the population. So productivity will be high. So we should be able to utilize them. However, we cannot utilize them unless we have jobs for them, right? So you have to have a lot of good jobs. We can't have random jobs. We can't have unsafe jobs. We can't have non-productive jobs. We can't have very, very low paying jobs. We have to have safe, productive, well-paying jobs. And these kind of jobs are always in the formal sector. Informal sector jobs are neither safe nor are they very productive because not much skill training is given to any informal sector employee, and they're not well paying also because there are no regulations also there and there's no unionization also there. So we need to create formal sector jobs if we want to exploit the demographic dividend. Now ES Economic Survey studies why is formalization not happening in India properly, and what are the reasons for this, and how is the government responding to the formalization or informalization challenge. Now first thing is use of contract labor. We have a lot of specialized staffing agencies. So we have a lot of specialized staffing agencies like team lease. What do? They provide contract laborers for companies. So company doesn't have to hire people. The person will be in that company's payroll. The employee of team lease will come and work for your company. Now this allows firms to grow and actually improves productivity also, but it increases informalization of contract labor. Second, another interesting aspect that is coming in to counter the problems is competitive federalism. Again, we already mentioned this very important phrase in the economic survey. That's why we are underlined. Wherever we are underlined the language, you have to absorb the language and use the language. Those states are attracting employment where they are having proper laws and proper systems in place or proper structures in place. They are attracting employment intensive, high quality companies. Now that means these states will become magnets, as we saw earlier. So good politics becomes good economics also. Or good economics becomes good politics also. The third trend is labor intensive manufacturing. Some labor intensive manufacturing. Now in cities, what is happening is these labor intensive manufacturing are not able to stay in cities because all this extra labor, they cannot afford to stay in the city. They cannot come from very far because traffic problems, etc. are there. So the manufacturing itself is shifting out of cities, especially in areas like apparel. They are relocating to smaller cities. And that is another interesting phenomenon. So this phenomenon also we'll examine a bit more. Now, because of these developments, there is some scope for hope. These developments are allowing us some scope for hope, but this is states doing the work. This is private sector doing the work. Central government also has to boost this, and this can be done by expanding employees' choice through employment benefits. Primarily, they're talking about tax. We will come to that a bit later. So this is the overall overview. We need good jobs. Formalization is required. Informal economy was growing in the country. We are having some systems in place where contract labor is now being used productively. Competitive federalism is also incentivizing states to do the same things. Labor intensive manufacturing is moving out to smaller cities, and Sender has to complement all these developments. That is the overall chapter. Now let's go into details. First one, exploit the dividend. Already midway through means we're already halfway through. So we have only a few years left, close to 25 something years. We need to create good jobs as we discussed, safe, pay well, encouraging people to improve skills. Now, informal sector, there is no reason for firm to invest or worker to work hard to get new skills because they will not be staying there much longer. Only if skills improve, productivity increases. And only if productivity increases, we can exploit a demographic dividend. Now, a sad fact in India is that most employment growth since 1990 is from informal firms. And almost all the establishments, companies being formed, establishments are not actually companies because they're not registered, etc., are again informal in nature. So of the 10.5 million new manufacturing jobs created since the 1990s, only 3.7 million, 35% were in the formal sector. So that means bulk of the jobs are being created in the informal sector. So how will we exploit our dividend? This has to be solved. That's a big issue for us. Informal sector jobs are much worse than formal sector. Wages are almost 20 times higher in formal sector. So that is how low the wages are in the informal sector. Also, formal sector jobs are much better. It's not just pecuniary matters. It's not just about money. Even about employment history. Informal sector, you can't have an employment history. You don't have a CV. So later on, you can't go for a better job. Same way, you can't have access to formal credit. You have to have employment history to be able to access loans, etc. That also doesn't come because no employment history is being built up. In addition to this, no skills are being built up. So human capital also is not accumulating over time. So overall, good jobs is equal to formal sector jobs. That's the takeaway. Now, about 50% of good jobs in the formal sector is actually from manufacturing. So if you actually want to create good jobs in the formal sector to reach out to the mass of people, where do you focus? You have to focus on manufacturing. And that is where we will come to issues like Make in India. Make in India can help us do this. Now, there's a lot of cholesterol in the Indian economy. This is caused by excess regulation. Cholesterol means not much movement is easily possible. Cholesterol blocks all the movement. Proper blood flow is not happening. Now, if so much cholesterol is there, companies still want to move, right? They cannot just be stuck. They want to move. They are driven by profit. So what happens is they start looking for contract labor. Now, when a lot of companies are looking for contract labor, demand is there. Supply of contract labor also will come. Contract labor firms start coming up like TeamLease. Now, most formal sector manufacturing firms say that very bad norms are barrier to growth. Our very bad labor laws, especially the Industrial Disputes Act, which links to union, etc. These are reasons why growth is not happening. Regulatory cholesterol is stopping growth. And there are also regulations which encourage rent-seeking behavior. What is the meaning of rent-seeking behavior? Again, is a basic concept in economics. It means you're trying to make money not by productive activity, but by controlling certain aspects of the economy. Now, higher rents means lower growth because more money has to be paid here. Primarily, we're talking about bribes here. So a lot of bribery happens. So informal sector growth cannot really happen because there's a lot of rent-seeking going on. So that is a regulatory cholesterol. Now this leads to rise of contract labor. So contract labor is the best way companies have come up with to stop the regulatory cholesterol. So contract labor is the solution they have come up with. But we need to provide a better solution to them. What is the better solution? Remove the cholesterol. Then contract labor will start reducing. So hiring contract workers is a popular strategy. Benefit is that they're all subcontracted. So the firm itself does not have to invest much in them. They are employees of the regulator. So the firm size is important. The employee number determines the firm's size in India. So firm size remains small. Now small firms are exempt from a lot of laws. So when the firm size employee number is low, they are exempt from a lot of labor laws. So they remain small, but they can get more work done. So contract labor is beneficial for them that way also. So in 1999, 12% of all registered manufacturing workers are contract laborers. Now over 25% are contract laborers. So the proportion of contract labor is increasing in the country. So firms want to negotiate labor regulation. This is the best option they have found. Now also, contract labor is more in those states which have more rigid labor laws. So this shows us that it's because of regulatory cholesterol. Also, it is more common in plants with less than 100 workers. When any plant is there with less than 100 workers, they'll have more contract laborers. Why? Because then they will be not applying the IDA. So the moment plants become more than 100 workers, the IDA will start applying. So one good option is to go for contract labor there. So large firms, previously they were constrained under labor laws. They could not become large. But now the large firms are growing because of contract labor. So contract labor has helped growth. So we are not saying contract labor is all bad. It has also helped growth. But we have to promote growth now, not through contract labor, but through removing the regulatory cholesterol. So regulatory cholesterol was there. Contract labor helped, but contract labor is not the optimal solution. Let's remove the regulatory cholesterol and contract labor will come down. That is the overall summary. So overall, 0.5% boost has come from contract labor. So informal sector should be given some credit also, but it is time to move beyond that. So again, we are stuck in a small problem here because of informal sector, but it's time to exit that Chakravyuha also by reducing the extreme regulatory cholesterol or making the labor laws less stringent. Now, every firm also says contract labor is not ideal. They're going for the best solution available now, but actually it is not the best solution. It is just that it is the best one available to them right now. We can make a better solution available. Ideally, everyone prefers regular workers because you can train them. Human capital is built up. Their skill improves over time. Long-term investment in workers can be done. In contract laborers, you can't do any of those things. So even firms agree it is not good. And it's also more expensive for them also. And even contract workers have no loyalty to the company. So there is no point in investing in them. And contract laborers also don't like it because they get less money also and they get less protection, less safety, etc. So that is the part about regulatory cholesterol and contract labor. Contract labor is a problem. We should reduce regulatory cholesterol. Now, regulatory cholesterol means states have to reduce the labor laws. States have to reform the labor laws. That is where competitive federalism comes in. Now, because states are competing with each other, every state will now try to reduce regulatory cholesterol first. Then more investment will come in, less contract labor will be there, more actual growth will happen in those states. So that's where competitive federalism comes into the mix. So investment I is lagging, as we saw earlier. States are under a lot of pressure. They want to become investment destinations. So some states like Rajasthan have amended the labor laws, again discussed in detail in the tablet. Other students can refer to the current affairs segments. So large employers, high growth industries, only way to attract is removing regulatory cholesterol. So Rajasthan has done that by easing the labor laws. So some companies have this potential to create a lot of good jobs, especially in the formal manufacturing sector, even using relatively unskilled workers. Now, this is the reason why countries like China, states like Tamil Nadu has been embracing manufacturing products. So Tamil Nadu is famous for really encouraging manufacturing products a lot. Now, one of the focus areas is becoming mobile phones. That is because what you produce also matters. Some things if you produce, there are more externalities. There are a lot of linkages there. So they are called good products. The kind of products they manufacture also matters. What you export matters, what you produce matters, because your local know-how, your supply chain network, all these things also improve. So not only should you attract industry, you should also attract the right kind of industries, and everything depends on reducing regulatory cholesterol. So cell phones is considered to be such a higher quality product. So economic survey has a metric here. It goes into some detail and does some analysis, etc. Not important for us. Just understand it's a good export for us, because it will allow our export basket to improve. Our value-added products in the future can improve because we are developing better local know-how and better supply chain networks and better technology in the country by focusing on mobile phones. Now, another question is, can it be too much competition? Will Bihar, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, all these start fighting too much with each other? And when fighting, what can happen is they might make regulation really low. Regulatory cholesterol is a big problem. But what if we completely remove regulation altogether? Then it will become uncontrolled capitalism. Then it will become bad too. So we cannot have a race to the bottom in which every state, the state will say, okay, no environmental regulation in my state. Please come and invest in my state. No labor laws in my state. Please come and exploit the people of my state. This situation should not happen. Economic Survey state says that this does not seem to be happening. So we need not worry about that. We are far from such a situation. However, we should be aware that such a possibility is there. Now, the next interesting part, as we saw in the summary overview, is that relocation is happening. First type of relocation is apparel industry is functioning well. It's labor intensive. Unlike the fertilizer sector, apparel is a labor intensive sector. Only small costs come from capital intensive input. So always it's about capital versus labor, right? So anything which is more capital intensive will be less labor intensive. Anything more labor intensive will be less capital intensive. Apparel is labor intensive, whereas fertilizer is capital intensive. However, India is giving out market share to Bangladesh, Vietnam, etc. So apparel industry is not performing well in India. So how can India's productivity be improved? One is a kind of relocation. What we have to do is reallocate capital from less productive to more productive firms. This can be done by becoming pro-competition. That is one aspect of it. But this is less important. A more interesting aspect of relocation comes next in the economic survey discussion. So apparel, the formal sector, is 15 times more productive. So if you want to improve productivity, one thing is move towards formal sector. However, India's apparel sector is primarily informal firms. We have 2 million establishments with 3 million workers in the informal sector. In the formal sector, we have 2,800 firms with 330,000 workers. Look at the difference. 2 million versus 2,800. 3 million versus 330,000. That is the difference. In the informal sector, average size of a firm is 1.5 workers. In the formal sector, average size is 118 workers. So we can see that informal sector is dominating the apparel industry, which is something we have to change. Now, one interesting thing that is happening in apparel sector, as we discussed earlier, is that these are labor-intensive industries, right? Labor-intensive means a lot of laborers are required for the apparel sector, for the factory. Now, where will all these laborers stay? If the factory is in a city, these laborers will be exposed to the high cost of living in a city. So they're not able to stay in a city. So what will happen? They'll have to stay outside the city and they'll have to travel all the way to the factory. But this becomes very difficult. After some time, they will quit and go to some other place. So what these firms have realized is that it's better to move away from city, move to smaller cities, smaller towns, because their staying will be easier for these people. So they'll be able to work more easily. That is why these firms are relocating to smaller cities. So economic survey says that's a business model adopted by the apparel firms, labor-intensive firms. Now, if all labor-intensive people start moving like this, that will have some brilliant side effects. Let's look at those side effects. Living costs are high, transportation costs are high, so they're moving out, as we saw earlier. There's a new business model. They're relocating to second and third tier towns and cities. Now, what are the benefits? One, economic development now starts spreading to those underdeveloped other areas. That is a commercial benefit. Firms' competitiveness increase because in those cities, labor cost will be lower because living cost is lower. So firms benefit from lower cost. Another commercial benefit. Third is a social benefit. In these areas, the women start participating in the apparel factories. So they become part of the labor force. The labor force participation of women increases. And the moment women starts working, there are a lot of social benefits to it. That's a social advantage of the relocation model. The reason is because suitable jobs are coming. In these towns and these second tier cities, these women don't have proper options to work in. They don't have any places to work. They cannot go for very high, difficult kind of work. They cannot go for work which is far away from their places. But if work comes close to their home, then they can also participate. Suitable jobs for them come. Now, apparel industry typically employs a lot of female workers because it is not very highly physically demanding. So female workers can easily work. 70% of employees in this largest apparel exporter Just an example is women. So a lot of women work in the apparel industry. So women will get more opportunities because of this. So India has low rates of female labor force participation in rural areas and out of cities. This can be improved by the relocation model. Now, normally when we talk about low LFP in female, this is society-based discussion. Society-based discussion. Indian women normally don't work much. Indian women do not work in the formal sector, do not work in the industry, etc. much. They work in the home a lot, but outside the home is very less. Now, normally we say it's because of cultural norms. People discourage, women are not supposed to work. However, there's a demand side thing also. It is probably because they don't have proper jobs. If they have only risky jobs, very far away jobs, obviously they will not be able to work. But if they have nearby jobs, safe jobs, not manually difficult jobs, then they will actually start working more, which is what is happening with apparel sector. So normally decline happened in those villages where urbanization happened and they didn't get good jobs. Farming jobs disappeared. Woman-friendly service sector jobs did not come. Apparel industry can provide this option. Flexible, located close to home and not demanding. And working women, it said if women participated as much as men, 1.4% extra growth in GDP will happen. So that is a benefit that will be happening. Plus we have a lot of positive outcomes, household level, society, all this improves, more health, more investment in education happens because of working women. Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao Yojana, etc. is linked to this. So overall, this new model is a win-win-win situation. It's located in smaller cities. It uses women's advantage, women's work, and it's flexible working hours. Even childcare on site is provided. More women starts working there. So overall, a win-win-win situation comes. One, commercially advantages for the manufacturer. Why? Costs reduce. Second, women come into the labor force because suitable jobs come in. Boosting growth. Why? Because two reasons. New areas are getting growth and women are coming into the market. So win-win-win situation for the economy. So relocation model is something the economic survey is very excited about. We should also be excited about. Now we have looked at the private sector's job. What is the private sector doing? Private sector is trying to use contract labor and still continue to growth. What are the states doing? States are doing one thing. They are doing competitive federalism. They're competing with each other. Private sector is also doing the relocation model. But what is the sender's role? Sender's role is simple. It should go for ensuring worker-centric labor regulation. Good jobs has to be created. Worker-centric labor regulation. Now, normally labor laws, etc. are primarily linked to the state governments. So state governments have more impact there. However, there are areas where central government can have a big impact as well. Now, this is about mandatory taxes in formal sector employment. There is one reason why some people actually prefer working in the informal sector compared to formal sector. Why? In formal sector, the moment you come into formal sector, you have to pay taxes. And there are mandatory taxes also. So if somehow government can reduce some of these mandatory taxes at the entry level, maybe more people will come into the formal sector. Maybe more employers will be interested in bringing people into the formal sector. Now, if you look at the formal sector for lower earners, which is the entry level, 45% difference is there between employer giving the money and how much actually goes to the employee. So the difference is around 45%. That's a huge difference. Whereas for higher earners, which is past the entry level, only 5% difference is there because there are fewer mandatory employer contribution. Here, employer contribution also happens. It is part of your cost to company CTC, but it's not actually coming to your hand. It is a contribution. Example is EPF. So there are mandatory deductions, etc., less in higher earners. So if somehow this can be reduced, then we might have more people coming into formal sector. So this is the role for the center, is what the economic survey is saying. Now here, what we should understand is we are coming to the EPF. Now in an earlier discussion, we discussed the PPF controversy. Now the PPF controversy was actually academic controversy. The question was, should PPF be taxed or not? It was never actually done. Whereas the EPF controversy was a more practical controversy. So in the EPF's case, government actually implemented it and then the government had to retract on it. So EPF controversy and PPF controversy is slightly different. PPF is academic. You will mostly find this in the volumes of EPW, etc. Whereas EPF controversy was more practical. You'll find it in all newspapers, etc. So now we'll discuss what happened in EPF, at least what economic survey recommended about EPF. So there are some mandated worker benefit, right? The employee provident fund is a mandated worker benefit. The company is supposed to pay, worker is also supposed to pay. But effectively what is happening? Some chunk of salary is going into the EPF directly and the worker is not getting that money. So there are two things we should look at. One, does the worker actually want it? Does the worker like this EPF concept? That is one criteria. Second criteria is, who pays the cost? Is it the employee or the employer? Now, we might say employer is contributing, employee is contributing, etc. But economic theory has a concept called elasticity and economic incidence of any tax. Now, if tablet students and people who have read NCERT properly will know that any tax imposed on, any indirect tax imposed on anybody will be shared between two parties. Now, who will share more burden is the person who's more inelastic about it. So relative burden depends on elasticity of labor supply and labor demand. Now, if you look at entry-level labor, which will be more inelastic? Inelastic means they have less flexibility. Now, the firm will obviously be more elastic, whereas the worker is desperate for a job. So he will agree to whatever terms and conditions. So elasticity is less. That means effectively the burden of tax shifts onto the worker. So worker has to bear the burden of tax. Incidence tends to be on the workers. That means who pays the cost? Employees pay the cost. And do the employees actually value it? We will see they do not value it. So economic survey seems to be saying, is EPF something that we should continue in the current manner or not? So EPF was created by the Employees Provident Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1952. Questions will not come directly like this. 12% is involuntarily contributed by workers from their basic salary to the EPF. Where will it go? It will go to a fund managed by the Employees Provident Fund Organization, EPFO. Now, this will come back to you upon retirement. It's supposed to be for retirement. Employers are also supposed to contribute 12%. So effectively 12% from employee side, 12% from employer side is going towards a retirement fund. That is Employee Provident Fund. Now, do employees actually like EPF? More than 70% of people are saying, I would rather have cash than our EPF. Please, I don't want EPF. Give me cash only. Most of them are saying, I'm liquidity constrained. I need more cash right now and not EPF. Now, this will show that it actually shows a lot of people have this liquidity constraint. They actually need more money in hand. Or it will also mean that functioning of EPF itself is bad. These people don't have trust in the system. That's why they believe that it's better to have cash than EPF. So it could be either of these things. Now we'll see it's actually both of these things. So why don't they want EPF? One is that they want to spend money sooner. They're liquidity constrained. They're impatient. They don't want to wait till retirement. They would rather spend the money right now itself. That is one reason. However, here, this is not a valid reason, not a valid enough reason, because EPF is a mandatory way of forcing people to save for retirement. Because these people, if they don't save for retirement and the state cannot help them during retirement because we don't have a proper social security scheme, then what will happen to them? They should provide for themselves. That's why we are stipulating this EPF system. Second is, taking money out of EPF is so difficult, especially when you switch jobs. Because every time you switch jobs, what happens is a new EPF account is created with a new account number also. Now what happens is the previous EPF money is almost like lost. Now you have to work very hard to get that EPF money. So workers change employers frequently, may have up to 20 different accounts. So it's so difficult to manage all this, get the money out, etc. There is 44,000 crore rupees lying in inoperative accounts. That means no contribution or withdrawal in 3 years. That means this much money by these poor people is just lying around there, wasted. So that is the reason they are not having trust in the system. It's difficult to get money out of EPF. Now EPFO has been doing a lot of good things also. They're trying to reduce transaction costs. They're allowing electronic transfer of money between accounts. So if you have one account here and one account here, you can electronically transfer the money. Universal account number is being provided so that it's portable between employers. You don't have to start a new EPF account every time. But all this is taking time. Existing employees are still not having full trust in the EPF. So that is the problem with EPF as far as the employees are concerned. Now another problem is that even though it's mandatory for the poor and they don't like it, rich people also contribute to EPF. Now, why do they contribute to EPF? Because of tax reasons. Now, EPF, as we know, is an example of a subsidy for the rich. So it's very similar to what we discussed in chapter 6. Now, EPF contributions have an exempt status. They are exempt at all three stages: contribution, interest, and during withdrawal, they are exempt. Now, does this really benefit the poor workers who are mandated to contribute? If you think about it, it doesn't benefit them, because even who earn like 15,000 a month, they are below the income tax threshold. We have an income tax threshold only above which tax even comes. So for them, even if you exempt it or not exempt it, doesn't matter, because they're below the income tax threshold. They are at the lowest rung of the income tax. It benefits the richer component who are above the income tax threshold, and they will invest in EPF to save tax, whereas the poor people are not benefiting from EPF. Now, what economic survey is recommending is that should we make it non-mandatory for the poor? For the rich, it is non-mandatory. Should we make it non-mandatory for poor as well? If we do it, then the cost of hiring or the wages, effective wages after deductions might increase. So this will probably incentivize more people to join the formal sector, and productivity, growth, etc. can be higher. Now, the controversy will be discussed more in the current affairs parts. What happened is that the withdrawal was made tax. So it was made EET principle, very similar to what we discussed in PPF. However, this impacted people directly. It impacted the middle class people also a lot more. So there it became a controversy. So overall recommendation is this: should we make it non-mandatory? Should we make it less onerous on the poor? However, there's a counterpoint to this as well, which economic survey does not discuss, is that if we don't force them to save, then they will not save for the old age. And as a demographic transition happens and India becomes an older country, who will help these people? Unless the country has the fiscal capacity to provide social security for old age people, we have to have some way of forcing them to save for old age. And that is where the EPF was supposed to come in. So by making it EET and stopping withdrawal, the same principle applies, that we are trying to stop people from withdrawing and forcing them to save for old age. So if we can do both, if we can do EET plus make it non-mandatory, or make it slightly less mandatory or less onerous, etc., then the poor might be benefited. But this is an area where economic survey does not go full in depth and does not analyze all the aspects. So you should take this with a pinch of salt. And there's a lot of more discussion that happens around editorials, etc., about EPF. So you should be reading those areas as well before you come to a proper opinion about the EPF area. Now let's move into the next chapter, chapter 11. This is about the power sector or the infrastructure sector. So infrastructure again is an area where we have a lot of exit problems. What happened is that we used to have fixed pricing or regulated pricing. We used to have high costs, and this in between this we used to give subsidies, and this meant that the discoms, etc., were having higher cost and lower price, so they were not making profit, which meant they were having extra debt, like we discussed in the Chakravyuha system. When companies take debt and is not able to get profit and is stuck, what happens? Debt starts increasing, NPAs start mounting, no profit is there. So debt-ridden discoms became a big problem for India. So what is the problem in the power sector? Debt-ridden discoms. So now this chapter, Powering One India, the Uday scheme, etc., is primarily about how to rehabilitate the discoms, how to make them proper again. So again, we'll take a very short break of 2 to 3 minutes before we continue into this chapter. Please make sure you ask any doubts, etc., that you might be having in this break. factories, separate tariff. For EZZ, separate tariff. For companies, separate tariff. So many different types of tariffs are there, which means price signals cannot operate in a market like that. So reduce this complexity is one focus. Second is quality adjusted tariffs. What is the meaning of that? If we compare India's tariff versus other countries' tariff and you adjust it for quality, how much are our industry people paying for this low quality power? Are we paying too much? And does that affect the competitiveness of the Indian industry? That is the meaning of this discussion. Again, we'll come back to that. Optimal structure of consumer tariff is again provided by economic survey. We will see that as well. One market for power, something we want to create. What are the obstacles there is another focus. So overall, economic survey is saying we can have progressivity in tariff structure. What is the meaning of progressivity? Regressive we saw earlier, right? Regressive is when the poor has to pay more than the rich. Progressive is when the rich has to pay more than the poor. So we can go for progressivity in tariff structure. We can do that by lower tariffs for poor and also ensuring cost recovery. This is something called cross subsidization. So we will subsidize the poor, but we'll charge the rich. So effectively, who's subsidizing the poor? The rich is subsidizing the poor. That's an interesting and important concept called cross subsidization. So we'll come to each of these focus areas. Let's go into the details now. So first, some nice interesting numbers. These can come as prelims questions also. Now in power sector is one area where prelims, sometimes in prelims, actual factual questions come. So one is highest ever increase in generation capacity. Annual addition of 19 gigawatt over previous 5 years. Now we're having 26.5 gigawatts. Peak electricity deficit in the country. What is the meaning of peak electricity deficit? There's a peak demand and there is supply, right? The difference is the peak electricity deficit. At the time of peak demand, is the supply able to fulfill? If not able to fulfill, the difference is called peak electricity deficit. So now it has been brought down to lowest ever levels of 2.4%. Only 2.4% deficit was there in the country. So it's again some good numbers, right? Good numbers I told. Renewable energy targets have been revised. 32 gigawatt was the target. Now it is 175 gigawatt. That's more than a 3 or 4 fold increase by 2022. So this is very important. Please remember this potential prelims question. And that will help us move towards a sustainable development model. The national solar mission is there. The tariff has been brought down to just 4.34 per kilowatt hours. Grid parity. Grid parity means the normal electricity should become at par with the renewable electricity. This, if it happens, then solar power will become the norm. So that can become a reality. So some interesting numbers, direct questions might not come, but might also come. Useful to remember some of these numbers. Some other good things. Indian Railways is trying to go for an open access system. So this will again move us towards making India one market. We'll see this. Box 11.1 talks about this. Central and state governments are coming together and looking at multiple schemes like Ujjwal Discom Assurance Yojana, Uday. So all these things are being done. Box 11.2 gives a list. We will see box 11.2. However, challenges remain. Some good things are happening, but challenges still remain. One is complexity, as we discussed. Second is average tariffs. The price is much less than cost. Average tariff is less than the average cost of supplying electricity. If price is less than cost, means no profit. No profit means debt. So that we shouldn't have. Price should become closer to cost. That should happen. Another important challenge. High industrial tariff is costing India. Make in India, manufacturing sector, factories, everyone is affected because of high industrial tariff. And quality of electricity is too variable in the country. We are not able to provide a proper quality of electricity. So quality has to improve. Industrial tariff has to come down. Lot of price and non-price barriers. Single nationwide electricity price through open access is not happening, which we want to promote. Progressive tariff schedule for domestic consumers, we have to somehow move towards that. As of now, it's not progressive. That is another challenge. So these are challenges economic survey tries to address. One extra challenge is that There's a clear demarcation in the constitution between the center and the state. So we have the central list, the state list, etc. So here there's a clear demarcation, which means center's role is less in this. In addition to that, we are a country with very low per capita GDP. That means we are a poor country. We have 5 crore households without access to electricity. Again, very useful number. And hence, we cannot just focus on efficiency. We have to also focus on social benefit. We cannot just drive efficiency. We cannot say, okay, we'll do all these things. We have to also make sure everybody is getting electricity. We can't say, oh my God, cost is less than. We cannot say, oh my God, price is much higher than cost. Sorry for a slight mistake there. So we cannot say cost is much less than. We cannot say cost is much higher than price. Hence, let's start increasing price, because when you increase price, the poor people will be affected. Cost might have to stay higher than price. Price might have to stay low because of these social factors as well. However, we have to tackle this as well as other challenges. So this is some aspects. Let's look at box 11.1. Indian Railways and open access. Indian Railways consumes a lot of energy. 1.7% of the country's total electricity is consumed by Indian Railways. Electricity is 25% of the revenue budget of Indian Railway. Revenue budget, the meaning of that is day-to-day budget. Again, tablet students and people who know the basics will be familiar with these terms. So IR, what is Indian Railways has gone to rationalize cost. What it's trying to do is it's going for changing from existing agreements. Right now, it has a lot of existing agreements with different state utilities. So everyone will be charging different costs. Instead, it will go through open access. Open access means it will be a single market. It will take from the best bidder. Whoever is giving lowest price will buy from that. So they are saying there will be 1,600 crore estimated savings in 2016-17. And to do this, it has been made a deemed licensee by Ministry of Power. So now Indian Railways can directly access electricity, procure electricity through open access. Open access means instead of directly through one contract with one particular company, you can have a single market with multiple companies, and whoever is giving lowest price, the Indian Railways will buy from them. That is open access. Multiple policy actions. All these policies are important for prelims. Ujjwal Discom Assurance Yojana. 75% of Discom debt will be taken by states. State will take it over. AT&C, aggregate technical and commercial losses. Technical loss and commercial loss is different. A technical loss is because of some technical fault, some electricity is getting lost. Commercial loss is actually theft. So AT&C includes both technical and theft or leakage losses. So we want to reduce that, second aspect of it. Difference between average cost to supply and average revenue realized. Basically, difference between price and cost has to be more rationalized. Increase supply of domestic coal. Imported coal is more expensive. Domestic coal will be cheaper. So electricity will be cheaper if you use domestic coal. Even future losses by discoms will be taken over by states in a phased manner. Banks and financial institutions are not supposed to give short-term debts. Please remember, only short-term debts. Do not give short-term debts to discoms. If you're giving debt, give long-term debt. So now prelims question can come, which among the following is part of Uday Yojana, Ujjwal Discom Assurance Yojana, or it can come in one specific aspect of it. And this is listed out in the economic survey, so you should be aware of it. Similarly, we have other policies also. Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gram Jyoti Yojana. This is obviously Gram Jyoti means it's about village electrification. Metering unmetered connection, because we're losing a lot of money because unmetered connections is pushing a lot of electricity towards themselves. Continuous supply has to be given. For this, we have to make the infrastructure of electricity provision proper. That is another aspect. Sub-transmission, distribution network, again, all about quality and reliability of supply. Both this is about proper infra. So all you have to remember is infra has to be improved to improve quality and continuous supply and reliability. Next is integrated power development scheme. Again, about sub-transmission, distribution network, but this time in urban areas. Again, about metering. Again, about transformers. And here, IT also has to come in and help the distribution sector is what they're saying. IT here is information technology or computers or technology. Domestic efficient lighting program. This is about efficient lighting. So we have to move towards LED bulbs. Right now, a lot of household and street lights are incandescent bulbs. They're consuming a lot of electricity. If we can move through to LED, they'll consume less electricity. National tariff policy is there 2016. Here, cross subsidy surcharge formula is there, that is revised. Cross subsidy surcharge means surcharge for people who are consuming a lot, subsidy for people who are consuming a less. Effectively, rich pay more, poor pay less. That is cross subsidy. Regulators are supposed to come up with a 24/7 power supply program. We have to wait and see if that will ever get implemented. So overall, as we saw earlier, tariffs has to be made simple. And we saw earlier wetland farms, pisciculture, poultry farm, all of them have different products. So end use based price is provided. This has to move towards a single price. So this complexity is not good, as we discussed earlier. Now, if you have to work hard just to know what is the price, people actually consume less, or people are not going to respond to it. So if you have to work very hard to find the price of a product, you might as well give up on the product. This in economics is called salience or salience. This means that if price of information is very high, people might not purchase the product. So price of information has to be brought down, and that means things have to be simple. So if we can have only 2 to 3 tariff categories instead of so many categories, that will improve transparency, might include improve consumption, collection, etc. And even governance can improve. Now, discoms is very important in the power sector. Now, what happens is that we have producers, we have a wholesale market. From them, discoms get, and discoms give the power to the final consumers, the actual households. So discoms are the intermediaries. Now, any intermediaries, how will they make money? They will make money in the difference between the cost of procurement and the price at which they sell. The difference will become their profit. So that they have to be able to make a profit to be able to stay in the business. So they purchase electricity and market it to retail customers, as we discussed. They have to be able to have a markup over the cost of supply. However, that is not happening because government is interfering too much, right? So prices are always too low. Cost is always very high. So they are piling up debts. They are having losses. So this debt overhang has become a huge problem for bottleneck, as a bottleneck for the entire sector. Bottleneck means something that is stopping progress from happening. So discoms has to be brought out of this Chakravyuh problem. That is where the Uday scheme is coming in. Now, why do all these losses happen? Highest losses are where tariff don't or prices are much lower than costs. Here, prices is average tariff and average cost of supply, ACS, is the cost. So areas like Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, etc., AT is lower than ACS and their debt is higher. So tariff reflecting cost is required. Otherwise, sustainability cannot happen. The discoms cannot sustain. They'll keep on having debt. Government will keep on having to bail them out, which is exactly what is happening under Uday scheme, right? The states are taking over the debt of discoms. But how long can states continue to do that? Can states keep financing these discoms? We have to have tariff reflecting costs. And the best way to do that, as we discuss later, is to move towards a better cross subsidization scheme. Now, if you look at Make in India, it depends on the industrial sector. It depends on manufacturing. However, manufacturing itself depends on quality infrastructure, and most important infra is electricity supply and quality of electricity supply. High tariff, erratic supply and bad quality means less growth of industrial electricity. And what a lot of these guys are doing is they are moving towards captive generation. What is the meaning of captive generation? There's a company here. This is the electricity coming from the grid. This is always erratic, hardly ever comes, full-time power cut, etc. What will the company do? Company will say, okay, I'll set up my own diesel generator and I'll get supply from myself. This is called captive generation. So utility means from the government utility. Instead, most companies are now moving towards captive generation. Now, if you remember earlier, there's a problem called exiting the state, right? What does it mean? When the state cannot provide essential service in a proper manner, the affluent people, the rich people and the rich companies will exit the state. They'll say, state, you keep your service. I will give my own service to myself. That is an example here. Captive generation is happening. So economic survey gives some numbers also there. Before that, you can see here, right? This is the industrial tariff. Okay, this here. This is per capita GDP. Now, in countries with high per capita GDP and all, they have much lower industrial tariff. Look at India. We have low per capita GDP and we have high industrial tariff, and it's red color, right? Red color means low quality. So we're charging very high tariff for a very low quality electricity. At this quality, we should only be charging this much. South Africa also has low quality electricity, but they're charging much lower. Bangladesh also has low quality electricity. They're also charging much lower. So India is one of the worst quality electricity, but we're charging much higher than a lot of these countries. We have to change that. Unusually high electricity tariff, especially quality adjusted tariff, has to be brought down. We have to bring down the tariff for the Indian industry. And the best way to do it, economic survey is saying, is hit the domestic market. Industry has to be protected, right? The whole economic survey is market oriented, industry oriented. So where will the money come from? Hit the domestic guys, hit the domestic rich people, charge them more, surcharge them, charge them extra for electricity utilization, and subsidize or reduce the Indian industry cost, high tariff in industry. So this is the case of exiting state as we discussed. So some numbers, 47% of firms are using diesel generators. Capacity is increasing. Very high growth rate there. And as oil prices come down, even more people might go towards captive generation. So here comes the open access issue. Open access was introduced in 2003 under Electricity Act. What it means is that any consumer having electricity load above 1 megawatt, which means they are a high consumer having a lot of consumption, they can procure electricity directly from electricity market. Now you remember, there are producers, then there is a wholesale market, then there is a discom, and then there is a consumer, right? Consumer gets from discom. Now what open access means is that forget the discoms, directly take from the wholesale market. That is the meaning of open access. But this is allowed only for high consumption customers, people who are having more than 1 megawatt consumption. So overall, it's a country-wide supply and demand on the same platform. A country-wide market is what is envisaged. So if you can have a country-wide market, eventually we can have a single country-wide price also. That would be a beautiful concept. We have not reached anywhere close to that. However, Indian Railways taking that step is a huge step, as we discussed earlier. So these are called open access exchanges. Power exchanges are set up to operationalize OA. So these wholesale markets, everything will happen through exchanges. So price discovery will happen, buying and selling will happen, competitive bidding will happen, everything will happen through power exchanges. So currently, generation capacity has been increasing. Discoms, because they are under heavy debt, they are not able to purchase electricity much. So we are actually having extra load. We are actually having extra electricity being generated. So it's a good time to divert it towards the industrial sector. Industrial sector has a high demand. So right now we have supply which is increasing and demand which is increasing, but Discom is not able to satisfy it. Now if industrial sector can directly connect to the market through open access exchanges, then we can promote the open access exchange right now. So it's a golden opportunity also. Whenever a crisis comes, it's also an opportunity. So the excess generation capacity, supply is not happening, capacity is there, should be diverted through OA towards the industry. So what is happening is, producers are there, they have capacity. Discoms are there, so not enough demand is coming. So because of that, capacity is not being fully utilized. So if we can divert it through exchanges to the industry, more of this capacity will be utilized and industry can directly purchase. And this will help Make in India also, because industrial production boosts. Now next part is, however, we cannot continue hurting the domestic consumer, especially the poor consumer. We have to go for progressivity of tariffs. So currently we have no proper guidelines for intra-category cross subsidization. What is the meaning of intra-category cross subsidization? Say people who consume more than a certain amount of electricity versus people who consume a certain amount, much less category of electricity. Intra-category subsidization. Charge the higher category more, subsidize the lower category. Same thing happens in railways, if you know. In railways, what happens? We charge in the AC compartments more and we give very low prices for the seater and the second class compartment. So effectively, second class compartment is so cheap because the AC people are paying more. So if you want to subsidize the second class compartment even more, what you can go for is intra-category cross-subsidization. What you can go for is charge the AC consumers even more, and the second class subsidy can be even more. So that is subsidy provisioning, which means allocating subsidy as per rich and poor. Whoever has more capacity to pay should pay. Again, a principle of taxation, if you remember. Now, as consumption increases, tariff schedule is progressive, because if you guys are paying your electricity bills, you will know that as you start increasing your electricity consumption, your bill also starts increasing. However, even after that, the price is still more often than not less than cost. So there are still costs to be fully recovered, which we should be aiming towards. So here it's a public finance challenge, greater revenue collection with greater welfare allocation. We shouldn't hurt the poor also, at the same time get more money also. How to do it is cross-subsidization. Now, poorest tariff can be reduced without unduly burdening richer consumer. However, we are going to tax them more. Now, how can we tax the richer consumer more? Now, suppose they increase the price of the price tariff rate as consumption increases. Suppose above a certain limit of consumption, tariff is really high. Now, the rich guys, can they stop consuming? They'll have TV, they'll have refrigerator, they'll have AC, they'll have all these things, right? Are they going to sell off all these things? No. They are having inelastic consumption pattern. Now, when inelastic consumption pattern is there, you can easily cross-subsidize there, because the rich people cannot change their behavior. And the poor people will be able to utilize that, because their prices are coming down. They'll actually increase their power consumption. Whereas rich people will not be able to reduce their power consumption. Again, think in railways, right? If you increase AC carriage, will the rich guys suddenly start traveling in second class seater or in sleeper compartment? More likely than not, they will not. They will continue to travel in AC compartment because they're used to that luxury. They can't change their behavior suddenly. They're having inelastic behavior. So wherever cross subsidy comes, you have to discuss inelasticity. Otherwise, it is not a complete discussion. Please remember that. So relatively inelastic, they'll continue the consumption pattern. So they'll continue to subsidize the poorer category. And overall, discoms can become more cost neutral. So summary of the chapter, we're moving towards the end of this conclusion. So areas of progress, as we saw, is record generation capacity is coming. We are moving towards one market. Who is moving? Indian Railways is moving. A lot of reforms are happening in discoms, especially about Uday and price rationalization. Renewable sector is improving. That's another good thing. Now we want to continue these reforms. One is about one market. Burden on industry has to be relieved. Tariffs to be made simple and transparent. Progressivity has to be happening through cross-subsidization and helping the poor. In all this, state governments and state regulators have a key role to play, because power is an area where state has a lot of role to play. However, center has to facilitate all these things. Now, this is again an interesting sentence. Power sector is a perfect crucible. Crucible means a place where you can do experimentation of the cooperative competitive federalism experiment. Cooperative competitive federalism experiment, any state which moves towards better power will also have better industries coming in. So competitive federalism. Center also has to cooperate in all these things, and states has to cooperate with each other for proper open market, one market to happen. So cooperative. So both these aspects come in the federalism experiment. So that is the end of the lecture. So we will now address a few questions. So before that, again, let's just reiterate the plan for the rest of economic survey. In the first 3 lectures, we have essentially focused on volume 1 of economic survey, and we've covered all the chapters. However, what you have to understand is that we have been continuously bringing in things from volume 2 also. Wherever in any chapter, volume 2 also talks about the same things, we have brought that also into the discussion in that relevant chapter. So for example, in fertilizer chapter, we have brought in things from volume 2. So there are some areas of volume 2 which is still not addressed. So when we covered volume 1, a bulk of volume 2 is addressed. For example, public finance chapter, agriculture chapter, etc. has been addressed when we discuss volume 1 itself. But there are areas and topics in volume 2 which is relevant for the exam, which is not yet addressed. Volume 2 is more factual in nature. Volume 1 is more understanding oriented. So volume 1 is of course more important, but volume 2 also cannot be neglected. So that will be covered in the next lecture. And then in the final lecture, we'll be taking up budget. So volume 2 in the next lecture and final lecture will be on budget. And by the time we complete the whole thing, we'll have a complete holistic understanding of the entire Indian economy as long as basics are already in place. So now we'll take up a few questions in case good questions and interesting questions are there. So please send in your questions so that we can discuss them. So one question has come is that when state is giving subsidy, why is debt coming? The problem here is that subsidized price is going to the consumers. Okay. The discoms are supposed to give at this subsidized price. Now discom itself has a cost of acquiring electricity. Now discom is supposed to be reimbursed by the states wherever subsidy is there. However, discom is also supposed to be a profit-oriented company. Now, when this reimbursement doesn't happen and price is consistently less than cost, the discom has to borrow. Now, the discom consistently borrows, we have a huge debt overhang problem that starts building up. Now, this debt, eventually the government itself is paying because government is supposed to reimburse a bulk of it anyway. So we cannot say government is completely paying off all the debt of the discom. Essentially, it can be considered as part of government debt only. However, it's accumulated by discoms. Now, essentially what has happened is that this subsidized price is going, discoms are not being reimbursed, discoms started generating debt, that was causing NPS also. So now states have taken over the debt of discoms. Now states are not under obligation to do that, but states have done that anyway because there is no other way to save the discoms right now. So you have to read up more on the Uday scheme. Again, in India Yearbook discussion also, I'm sure this scheme has been discussed, but this is an important scheme. Multiple questions can come from this. So it is recommended that you go to this site called prs.org and look up the Uday scheme and just briefly understand that. So another question has come, what are the bad effects of cross subsidization? For example, if you tax the rich more, now when you talk rich here, we are also taxing the middle class now because of climate change, etc. ACs, refrigerators are becoming regular use items for the middle class also. Now remember earlier we discussed that if you target the middle class and tax them too much and don't provide essential services proper also, so if you're charging them more for lower quality electricity, they also will not be happy. They will also go to exiting the state. What will happen? They'll also have their own private enclaves. They will have their own diesel generators. Same problems can come there also. But economic survey does not go into those discussions. But that should come from your own understanding after reading the economic survey, connecting more to other aspects as well. But interesting, good question. Thanks for asking that question. I hope others also understood.